I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey everyone, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast AI and Traction. Today's Traction webinar is brought to you by Boast AI Launch Academy in partnership with Growth Blazers. As you're joining, please introduce yourself. Tell us your name in the chat, what location and what part of the world you're tuning in from. What does your company do? What you're looking to get out of the session. If you have any questions, hit the Q&A tab, put your questions there. We'll take them at the end. And yeah, feel free to introduce yourself. I am in Scottsdale today, out of my normal place. And Adam, you're based normally in San Diego, right?
Yeah, that's right. Based in normally down in San Diego, but up in San Francisco. First day opening our office back up here. So exciting.
Awesome. Chargebee, what a great story. You guys valued at $1.5 billion almost, with more than 200 million in funding. You've become the subscription management platform used by over 1,800 companies in 53 countries, and you've got almost 1,000 employees in across 100 cities. Wow, what a great story. So Adam here, Adam Tesan is the CRO, Chief Revenue Officer at Chargebee, where he's responsible for all revenue, sales, customer success, and partnerships. And Adam comes with more than 20 years of experience in the tech industry, driving hypergrowth in SaaS and digital marketing businesses globally in both public and private sectors. And you were also VP Sales and Marketing at Everyone Counts, where you helped them grow from 30 million to 500 million and then IPO. You've had a fantastic journey, and you're going to give us a glimpse into the playbook for achieving hypergrowth. Adam, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Thanks, Lloyd. Appreciate the kind words. Yeah, it was the active network that we grew from 30 to 500 million.
Definitely. And we got a lot of people from different cities here: New Delhi, Vancouver, Brazil, wow, San Diego. This is amazing. People are tuning in from all over. Fantastic. So let's get right into it. You've had an impressive career, right? Walk us through your backstory. How did you get to where you are today?
Fortunate to land at some of the right places at some of the right times. You know, I went to university in England, in Manchester, and I joined the first company, which was the Active Network, in sales, software company. And you know, at that point, they'd actually really figured out SaaS already. I mean, they started in 1999, so it was about 2001 when I joined. When I ended up joining them, and they'd already started pushing a SaaS product. It was actually a SaaS-based transaction product, and they'd figured it out, and so that they scaled really quickly. And that first job turned, I spent 13 years there because we were growing so quickly. To your point, 30 million to 500 million. We IPO'd. We actually got taken off the market a couple years later by Vista. So I saw a whole lot on that one journey. It was pretty exciting, and like I said, they were really at the forefront of the SaaS movement back then.
That is, I'm seeing that happen now and then, right? Like companies go public and then they get taken private, and Vista is buying a lot. So that's an amazing journey. What took you to Chargebee?
I took a little bit of a hiatus. I spent most of my career in enterprise SaaS. I took a little hiatus for 4 years with Empire into ad technology, and we were actually selling that company. And then I actually fortunately got reached out to by somebody working with Chargebee, looking to fill the CRO role, and it was right in my wheelhouse. You know, enterprise SaaS, SMB, wanting to move up market, build a global sales team, inbound, outbound motion. And so sounded like a super exciting project, and it certainly played out that way so far.
Definitely. Awesome. So give us a brief intro of Chargebee. Why are you guys awesome? Why is it a great product? Why do you love it so much?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for the opportunity. So as you mentioned, Chargebee is a subscription billing and revenue management system, and it automates the reoccurring billing, provides smarter subscription management tools, and really streamlines the revenue ops for companies of all sizes around the world. I think one of the things that's interesting about Chargebee is we've product-led growth strategy, so a lot of focus around usability, native integrations into ERP, CRMs, payment gateways, and And the other element is, so one, we can manage, we're purpose built for high growth businesses. So those that are scaling, hyper growth that we're talking about today, that's what our platform's built for, to manage those that are going to start expanding vertically, geographically, different sales motions, self-serve, sales driven. And that, one of the unique elements is, because we were founded out of India, is we were kind of global by nature. So, we've got data centers in the US, the EU, APAC, because we understand the data sovereignty and partnerships with gateways. So yeah, really that global element allowed us to be able to facilitate what is, a lot of the growth paths that people take on their journeys, right?
So if you want to build a high growth company, SaaS company, hyper growth company, you got to run your business on Chargebee. Awesome. Thanks for that information there. And folks, go to chargebee.com to check it out. But let's get into hypergrowth. You've seen hypergrowth multiple times, from 30 million to 500 million to IPO. Now Chargebee is worth 1.5 billion almost. What is hypergrowth?
Yeah, great question. Big question. There's lots of different perspectives on it. And hypergrowth and that growth rate is really dictated by kind of life stage that the company's at. But if you look at the World Economic Forum, for example, they consider hypergrowth as a company that's growing 40% year over year for at least a couple of years in a row. Chargebee, we've been 100% plus year over year for the past 5 years. And what starts happening and that's kind of where I see that triple digit is that real hyper growth, because it really starts requiring another level of operating rhythm, mindset, and start stretching all parts of the organization, whether it's the people, the structure, the processes. And so you've got to be moving and building at the same time that's going on. And you can, it's easy to outstrip your supply lines pretty quickly if you're not building and doing all at the same time.
It's like jumping from a plane while attaching yourself to a rocket, and then
Yes.
or rather jumping from a plane and building your parachute on the way down.
Exactly.
Going really fast. Awesome. When is the right time to consider hypergrowth? So I like this stat, right? Like the World Economic Forum says 40% in a couple of years. Chargebee has been growing 100% year over year for the last 5 years. Many VCs will argue that the way to build a hyper growth company is triple, double, meaning the first couple of years you grow 3x, and then you start 2xing. After a while, it becomes really, really hard, especially at you guys' revenue range. I think post 30-40 million, it becomes really hard to get 100% to grow 100% year over year. But when is the right time to consider hypergrowth for a company?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it really, it happens at different, stages. That, it's the old adage, the overnight success that took 10 years to build, right, is pretty typical in this, because it takes a little bit of time to build. But, as far as kind of when to start really thinking about the scaling is really after that product market fit, which is critical. And then once you've got product market fit, and then the next two things that you really need to do is you need to figure out, what's your customer acquisition channel and get that motion going. But more as important, if not more important, is retention. Once you've figured out the acquisition channel and strategy and the retention side of things, and you've got confidence in your core unit economics, then you can start thinking about, I think, scaling. But until that point where you're still, hey, I can capture them, but I can't keep them in the boat, and I can keep them in the boat, but I can't catch them as quick as I like. And then the unit economics that play into those, once you have confidence in those and they're repeatable, then I think you can start hitting the gas. Definitely.
And product market fit itself is a huge beast, right? And some people never achieve it. Some people take years, or for some companies, it's really, really quick. But once you have that, you're saying then is the time to hit the gas, right? You need two indicators of that. One is high retention, and you've figured out one repeatable, scalable channel, like you said. So what are some key strategies that you've seen, that you've deployed, that has worked to enable that 100% plus year-over-year growth.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of fit into what we're talking about. I mean, pricing experimentation, I think is critical when you're hypergrowthing, and you need a platform to be able to, quickly adapt and get creative and experiment with pricing. Your customer retention strategies, like you have to have that playbook nailed down on how you retain customers. The third one's being looking at expanding globally and vertically. And when you start doing that, whether they're geos or verticals, you really need to take a good look at, how attractive those markets are, whether they're verticals or geos, and then your ability to win in them. And then the other one is the one that we talked about, which is that acquisition channel, or the diversification of acquisition channels. Is it, product-led growth strategy, sales-driven, inbound, outbound? Is it by a channel? Eventually when you get into this hypergrowth mode, to your point being, it gets harder and harder. You need to start kind of enabling more and more acquisition channels. So, at certain stages, and certainly with a lot of our customers, they'll start out with one, and then they'll quickly implement another. Either they're forced to, or that's another way to drive their growth. So that's it. And then just using the data to drive the growth on a continuous basis. Yeah.
So if you look at it, the way you've described the phases is, say you're starting out, and your first job is to validate the idea. Then it is, let's get to product market fit. And some of the key indicators you said, product market fit is high retention. What is a good retention rate is a question I just got asked, and I have a view on it, but we would love to get your view. My view is it should be at least 100%. That should not be a question, right?
Yeah, but I think early on. I mean, so we if you take it as a percentage of revenue, and ours actually correlates logos and revenue, but what tends to be a best in class is about 1.5%. Is decent. So, and then it'll fluctuate and
1.5% logo churn or
revenue. But in some businesses like ours, they actually correlate quite closely. Like our retention, ours is actually about 0.9%, and the logo and the revenue correlate quite closely together.
But then the net revenue retention is
that's another totally different ballgame, because in our business, there is some churn naturally. In most businesses, there's some churn, and that's where the NRR rate, and that's one of, like, if you think about North Star metrics for us at the stage of growth that we're in, there's two things. Can we keep 100% year over year on net new sales? And can we keep our NRR best in class? And NRR is net revenue retention. Best in class is considered around 125%. So the way the NRR calculation works is, as you know, is am I expanding my customer base and growing it more than I'm losing? So at 100%, you'd be losing exactly as much as you're expanding. At 125%, you're growing it. So if you stopped your new sales, you could still grow the business at 25% year over year.
Yeah. So basically new sales minus any churn plus upsell, cross-sell, expansion.
It's actually not new sales. It's your expansion and upsell versus churn out of the customer base. Yeah.
Awesome. So that is a great North Star metric. So we're talking about metrics here as you scale. So first step, validation, get some people to pay for it, try it out, then product market fit. Your North Star metric is customer retention. Then you get to a point where you need to get to product channel fit, figure out a scalable, repeatable acquisition channel. And then you get to a point of scale where NRR, your net revenue retention, is very important, and you're spending time not only nailing what you've scaled or putting fuel on the fire, but then you're trying out new channels as well. So let's unpack some of that, right? How do you identify acquisition channels, and then how do you sort of decide when's the right time? When have I exhausted this channel, right? And then how do I figure out new ones?
Yeah, great question. I was listening to Aaron from Box do a speech at SaaStr a few months back, and it was interesting. And we see this a lot in our customer base. A lot of there's a notion out there that you're either product led or you're sales led, and you can't be both, and they can't coexist. And actually, that's quite quite the opposite. We see a lot of companies, they'll like those two strategies can coexist really nicely. I think Slack's a great example of that, where product-led growth, they got in, and then what happened was they were watching the signals in that self-serve, and then they went, wow, okay, there's X number now using it in this company, time to drop the salesperson in, and Box did the same thing. So those actual both strategies can coexist quite nicely and complement each other, because then you end up with product qualified leads as well as marketing qualified leads and all these other things. So, you know, at ChargeBee, we've got our a freemium product. It's self-serve. There's about 25,000 clients on it. People can go sign up, help themselves and get started. And eventually they start growing if their businesses take off and move into different categories. So what we typically see in our own customer base is a company will start out with one, either sales or product led, depending on kind of the segmentation of their market, what they're selling, et cetera. But quite quickly, they'll introduce another one. And we've seen it both ways. We've seen enterprise sales driven clients come to us. CrowdStrike's a great example, saying, hey, we want to now introduce a self-serve motion. And then the other way around, the self-serve folks, Hopin's a great example of this. We just watched them blow up, which was started all, product-led growth, self-serve, and then all of a sudden they needed to introduce the sales-driven enterprise play as they got bigger and bigger clients. So both of those motions have end up playing a part in the business.
Definitely. And when you're starting out, focus is really, really important. And that's why it's important to build your company in phases, right? Product market fit. Your North Star metric is just make sure people love it and keep coming back and they stay.
Right.
Product channel fit, figure out one channel. If you try to do too many things when you're a small team, you're going to fail most likely, right? But when you're at scale, then you got to figure out new things. And as you look at Slack, like you said, Box, Dropbox, everyone eventually, to grow past 80, 90, 100 million in ARR, they need to add a sales team.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right? Inevitably. Yeah.
Inevitably add a sales team. So a lot of people, they hate on sales team, but inevitably you got to build a sales team. And we'll get into all of that, how you build and scale the sales team. But startup wisdom says the best way to increase revenue is to increase pricing. What's your take on that? What are some best practices to run pricing experiments?
Yeah, I actually I absolutely agree. I think I mentioned one of the strategies is pricing experimentation. And so absolutely, the pricing strategies get pretty complicated. There's a lot of variables that go into pricing, packaging. And then also you have to have the right platform to be able to rapidly kind of experiment and adapt, which is important. So, if you start at the top from a pricing perspective, the macro considerations are things like market attributes. Is it a large market, a niche market, your brand position? Are you going to be the low-cost provider, professional, small firms, enterprise? What's the competition look like? What's your perception? Actually, I really like this from, we were on a pricing discussion a little while ago, and somebody was saying, hey, you should pay attention to the perception of your company on platforms like G2 and Capterra. Like, how are you viewed? And then, like, as you start getting into that, then how do you extract value? Like, what are the levers that you have? Optimizing plans for add-ons, creating upsell opportunities to fulfill that NRR that we talked about, de-feature lower plans, tier-based, volume-based usage. So there's a fair amount that goes into that pricing experimentation.
Definitely. Awesome. And from a customer retention standpoint, right? So now, like, you've got this product, you're trying to get to product market fit. Retention is your number one goal. What are your top customer retention strategies?
Yeah, good question. One of the I think one of the elements that plays into this at any point, and some people figure this out sooner rather than later. One is being proactive against it, and the other is figuring out what your aha moment is. For ChargeBee, we know that as soon as somebody starts processing, even if it's $1, our LTV on that client expands exponentially. There's a lot of companies that had these kind of nailed down their aha moment. We talked about Slack. Slack was as soon as somebody sent 2,000 messages to the team. They knew that was the stick. Yeah, Dropbox was, I think, one file in one folder on the box. So I think that retention strategy really plays into understanding what the aha moment is, specifically for your product set. For us, like I said, we don't let a customer come out of our implementation team until there's a dollar process, because we know directly correlates to exponentially extending our LTV. So that's one. And the other thing that we never let a good crisis go to waste, so to speak. The other thing that we learned in a hurry on the onset of the pandemic was we needed to segment and get far more granular than we were in our customer base to really understand the impact specifically, not only on verticals and geos, but sub verticals as well. And so we could proactively go at, customers that were, say, in the restaurant business at the beginning, and proactively say, we know you're going to, these are hard times, obviously, for you. And then, proactively offering them to pause and getting after it a little bit there. So, it forced us to get a lot more granular on our customer base and how we segmented it and sub-segmented it, and then put proactive strategies around it.
Definitely. If you want to retain customers, you have to be proactive. You can't be reactive. And I like that you said you don't let people off the hook until they process at least $1. I had Superhumans founder a little while ago on here, and Superhuman is an email tool, right? Yeah. It's a Gmail killer, Gmail competitor, and it's a $30 a month product, but they understand the LTV of a user, and then potential implications to that user turning into multiple users and the NRR going high. So they have onboarding specialists. I've never seen this before, but for a $30 a month product, they manually onboard everyone. So they do a call, like a Zoom call or a video call, and they onboard and they do a demo and they do a walkthrough, and they fundamentally believe that. And engineering retention is very hard through product. And if you can have somebody give them a wow experience over a Zoom call or an onboarding experience, they're more likely to stick around. You build that relationship, right? So whatever you need to do to keep the customer, and you don't have to be sort of like biased, like, oh, we're just going to keep it all tech touch. If you have to have a human in the loop.
Absolutely. There's we even on our freemium product, like we'll watch for certain signals from, like, I think there's 15 attributes that we look for certain types of businesses that come into our freemium product. And when we see them come in, we actually have a team that goes and starts working with them, because we know those attributes typically correlate to somebody that's going to go into a high growth mode.
What are some key attributes to look for?
Yeah, I mean, we for that, like where they've come from, they're in an accelerator, what their funding looks like, there's geographically where they're coming from. So there's a handful of those that we look at, and then when we see those signals coming through on somebody that's signing up in our freemium, then we actually put a white glove team on them and take care of them, make sure they get onboarded and don't trip up anywhere and have that great experience. Yeah. Onboarding
is the key step between a signed up and a retained user. It's like I walk into a house, getting invited to a party, but the host is not there to welcome me, and I'm like tripping over garbage and pouring my own drinks. I'm gone, right? But if the host shows me around and pours me a drink and introduces me to the food and the key people there, then I'm gonna stick around there. So that's the best analogy I could find. Awesome. Let's move into your hypergrowth team, building your hypergrowth team, right? Because without a team, you have no growth. Ultimately, it's people. When is the right time to bring in a CRO? You just joined ChargeBee as CRO. You've been head of sales. When is the right time to bring a revenue leader into your company?
Yeah, great question. As a lot of these questions, I'm forced the answer depends. If I think about SaaS companies and where they get to, for a CRO role, it's probably around the 15 to 20 million range, give or take on either side of that, because really what the role of the CRO is is to start scalability and synchronization of all the revenue functions, as well as those GTM strategies that assure cross-functional revenue generation that aligns with the customer journey and optimizes their experience, which you were just referring to. And so what tends to happen earlier on is a company can get by each individual silo, taking care of their own house, getting stuff in place, getting processes and systems. And then at some point, in order to take that next jump in their growth journey, that cross-functional collaboration becomes critical. And then the idea of new GTM strategies, like Chargebee is a great example. So we grew all inbound with an inbound sales motion up until about 15 to 20 million in revenue. And then we were getting pulled slightly up market. And so we needed to introduce a new sales motion, which was an outbound sales motion, which was brand new. So when you start seeing those new GTM strategies and motions needing to come in and the cross collaboration across different functions, that's when I think it's important to start bringing in somebody that can kind of do that orchestration and synchronization.
You know what? This is a very interesting point you made, right? When you need to synchronize all revenue functions, you bring in a CRO. I've never got a straight answer from people. What is the difference between a VP sales and a CRO? And I think this is the most perfect answer I've received. Is like when you want to synchronize all your revenue functions under one house, CS and go to market and sales and partnerships, then you bring in a CRO. Perfect. So let's, perhaps some of our audience is not there yet at 10, 15 million ARR, right? But let's get to VP of sales then. When is the right time to bring a head of sales?
It's if I think about what a VP, the difference between, say, a sales manager and a VP, or a sales director and a VP, I think a VP has a much broader perspective and understanding of all the movements of the other functions. So, your analogy about the house party and walk it in, the VP will understand how to map the whole, because your processes need to be mapped to the customer journey, end to end, not like when they start talking to you is not when it's on the web, who's talking to them, then it's chat maybe on your website. And so being able to, somebody that understands orchestration all the way through that post sales. And you mentioned this before, like that onboarding is critical. So I think for me, that's where, the lens of a VP is much broader and can see pre, post, all the way through to the other end. So I think that's when, when you require somebody with that broader perspective of the organization in its entirety and how the customer flows end to end, that's probably when the VP is needed.
Awesome. Yeah. And oftentimes, you're a startup, you're selling and you're doing founder-led sales. And then you get to a point where like, hey, you know what? I think I can write a basic playbook to get one or two people to sell it. And then you realize you're not a sales leader and you go crazy.
Well, then you need your systems, your processes, like, can you build a sales process? Are you going to overlay the sales methodology on top of that? Like what systems then do you need? Yeah,
definitely. So let's say you're a new sales leader at a startup. Where do you start?
Let's say, it's for me, I think it's get really good at talent acquisition and development. Like, cause you're typically coming in, you've been great at sales, maybe, or maybe not, or great at something and you've just kind of stepped into this role. But, the mistakes that you see early sales leaders make is trying to do it all themselves because they were successful at it, if they came up through the sales ranks. But that's not how you scale. But how you scale is getting really good at talent acquisition and development.
Definitely. So then how do you ensure you have the right talent as you scale to like 50, 100 million in revenue? You're a new sales leader. Your first 30, 60 days, what are the key roles you start filling on?
Yeah. So probably one of the hardest parts of the journey is the hiring and getting the right talent on board for everybody. But, at each stage, you're looking for somebody different. If you think about kind of the stages that we've been talking about. Like at the product market fit stage, you're looking for salespeople that have product chops, right? Like you want somebody that's very been, and we just acquired a company, a collections company. I was talking to their, the founders, the CEO and COO, and they were like, all their sales, they only have three or four salespeople, but they're all steeped in product background engineering, because that's critical at that product market fit stage. But then when you start going to kind of the go-to-market fit stage, if you like, that's when you need somebody that understands how to build processes. And then when you get into that growth, then it's a process executor and orchestrator, right?
Awesome. And what are sort of the titles there? Like when do you need an SDR manager? When do you need sales ops? When do you need sales engineers, sort of thing? Like how do you think about it? Like, you come in as a head of sales to a new organization. What do you do the first, 30 days here, right? How do you take stock of the tools? Like, how do you put it all together?
Yeah, I mean, the first 30 days should be just taking stock of everything, taking stock of systems, people, and processes. That's what you want to be kind of mapping out and figuring out what you have. But, to answer your question, I think one of the things that people wait too long on is I would have a sales ops person in day one. The amount of data that gets generated out of the sales channel, whether you're a 2-person sales team or a 200-person sales team, is incredible. And it's incredibly valuable to make sure it gets fed back into the business on all sorts of sides, whether it's in the conversion funnels or, product feedback. Why are we winning? Why are we not, why are we losing? So that ops person for me is foundational, because they are going to lay the foundation and be able to capitalize on that data that's coming in through the sales org. And then your kind of question around SDRs, we have BDRs as well. It really depends on your sales, on your acquisition channel, right? Like if you're 100% product-led growth, maybe you don't need SDRs per se, or maybe you do want those SDRs that are, taking those product qualified leads and maybe converting them, but they're a slightly different animal versus a sales-driven motion where you'll probably want, SDRs doing inbound, outbound lead gen and qualifications, and so you can move your salespeople up the value chain, right?
Definitely. And then how do you structure the team eventually? How many people are on your in your sales org right now?
So in our sales org, we're probably about 125 people. We have when we started with inbound, we have a really large SDR team that does all the qualification on the inbounds. And I think that SDR team is as successful as they are is because the marketing team built an incredible demand generation engine that then that inbound lead flows into. And so for us, we've got on our inbound motion, we have SDRs, about 25 SDRs that are qualifying those inbound leads. Once they get qualified, they get, then the account executives get involved. Because of the nature of our product being fairly technical, we do, if you think about Chargebee sits right in the tech stack in the middle of an ERP and a CRM. Sometimes a marketing automation tool requires integrations to both. So we have a fairly robust pre-sales team, or some people call them solution engineers as well. And then we have our outbound motion. So we have a BDR team that's doing the outbound motion with an ABM processing in concert with marketing that then feed those into our enterprise or grow reps.
Definitely. And then in terms of leadership and management, do you have how many managers do you have managing these inbound, outbound SDR teams?
Yeah, so I mean, I run ratios, right? About 8 to 10 is about right for a manager. Depending if it's a more junior role, you can probably stack them up a little bit more into the 12. But so the kind of way we've structured the organization is our sales development, which includes our LDRs, SDRs.
What is an LDR?
So an LDR, we use them for lead. They're a lead development rep. And so we're fortunate enough they do a lot of our enriching. So they'll enrich inbound leads if we're missing data on them. They'll help us build lists. A lot of people outsource this. There's a lot of tools out there. We just happened to be in the inbound motion that we had, needed the LDRs to enrich a lot of the leads that were coming in to make sure that we could qualify them and keep those conversion rates up in the funnel. So a little unusual, but yeah.
And so you got LDRs, you got BDRs.
We've got LDRs, SDRs, and BDRs that are all part of our sales development team. So we have a director that runs that team. And then we have our account executives that are segmented into, our, you call it small, medium, and large segments, if you like. We have a VP over each of the regions, North America, Europe, and APAC, that roll up to a global SVP. And then we have our pre-sales director rolls into our sales our SVP of sales, who runs all our pre-sales, our solutions engineers. And then we have a head of partnership team that does the various partners. So we have ISVs, we have PSPs and resellers as partners.
Define those for us, ISVs and PSPs.
Yeah, so independent software vendors and ISVs. So think about the Salesforces, HubSpots of the world. So for us, those partnerships are a lot of tech enablement. As I mentioned, Chargebee needs to integrate to all these tools. So those are our ISVs. The PSPs are our payment service providers. So gateways, think Stripe, Adyen, Braintree, PayPal, the ones that are doing the payment processing, and then the resellers. And the first two buckets could actually be a third bucket. They could be a reseller as well as a payment provider, or an ISV as well as a reseller, but the two are very distinct. And then, each of the first two buckets could fall into the third bucket.
So to touch on partnerships a little further, it's really, really hard to build and scale partnerships, right? At what point do you start adding a partnerships team?
Yeah, it's a really good question as well. It depends where the partnerships lies. Like if they're ISVs and they're all they're just going to be tech enablement partners, then you maybe don't need a partnerships team, and maybe that lives in the product world, because all that you're doing is they're tech enablement for your application, right? I need to hook into payment gateways, and that's it. For us, there's a monetization strategy within our partnerships team. That's when we need somebody to start taking the lead on the partnerships team that, one, understands strategically the type of partners that we need to do, but then commercially how to monetize those relationships.
Awesome. And what is your top hack to motivate resellers to keep or partners to keep selling for you and referring?
I don't know if we figured that one out entirely. I think, for when we look at resellers and the ones that, in my past lives that have been successful, is you're strategically aligned with some of their core initiatives. And so, that's when it really takes hold there, because it's really hard. Some resellers sell 20 different products. So, there's ways to create incentives to make it happen. But what we look for when we look for resellers is, where does our product actually fit into, their top 3 to 5 strategies that they're going to market with? Or do we augment that strategy and add a ton of value there? That's when we have the most success, because it's top down. If you're in a pure, reseller environment, then it's making sure that whatever tool sets they're selling are complementary and adjacent to yours. So they're selling to the same buyer persona. And then you've got then your incentive structure and rev shares, juicy enough for them to prioritize you, right?
Definitely. Well, let's shift into KPIs for a second. What sort of KPIs do you look at for your team? And what are some best in class averages or ratios that the audience here should stay on top of?
Yeah, there's probably a lot in there. So we look at it. I mean, it depends on the team, right? If you're thinking about our sales development team, we look at, top of funnel conversion metrics. We see 10 to 15% of our MQLs are getting turned into discos. We have off the charts conversion rates from discos into deal creation, which are around 70-80%. So those are the ranges that we look at the very top of the funnel. Then you get into your close ratios or win ratios, and that's really subjective for our business. I think once you start hitting the 30% mark, I think you're doing really well. And as you know, like
When
for
you say
us,
30% mark, how do you mean?
30% win rate. So
Okay.
if you got a 30% win rate, then and all this is obviously very dependent on what type of market you're in, how many, what's the competition there. But I've found that to be quite successful. And then when you really start taking a hold, when you start driving 30, 40+%, you're doing extremely well on a win rate.
And that is 30 to 40% on like aggregate conversion, or from the coldest leads? How do you look at that?
So we look at it from how many deals were created, how many deals did we win? So it's, those conversion metrics that go further.
And created all the way from the LDR, it created all the way from the SDR, pretty much. Or
no, from the AE creating an actual deal in the pipe, because they're just a lead pre that stage, right? They're still
basically opportunities created to opportunities closed. If you're at 40%, I think then you start having a mini brand. If 40% of the deals come in, either you're closing too little, you have less deals in the pipe, or you have a brand where everyone's buying from you. That's fantastic. That 30-40% is a great number to aspire towards. Definitely win rates, close ratios. I want to take some audience questions here. Actually, Victor asked, do they ever work with OKRs? I think like what you're talking about is more granular, right? Like leads created, number of opportunities created, number of SQOs, sales qualified leads, like passed to the AE, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think like we use OKRs as a framework as well. I think I would distinguish the conversion metrics that we're talking about as kind of business as usual stuff versus kind of your objectives and key results that you're setting on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, because you need when you're working with a team that's executing day in, day out, you need very, very granular
that's right
metrics, right? Another question here asks examples how to best align sales goals to the product roadmap, or it should be the other way around, maybe.
Well, I like the other way around, and actually that's one of the things that I think we do pretty well here at Chargebee is it's actually the product that's setting the pace, not sales. And I've been in organizations that do both, but I think when I work quite closely with our CPO Omar, and so him and I sit down and we say, okay, we want to go in these verticals, these geos, we want to maybe go up market and do mid-market or enterprise. And so I sit down and say, well, we know what we need. We figured out all the requirements. Then you tell me when you're ready that we're ready to take that step up into mid-market. When's that product roadmap? I'll start planning the GTM accordingly. Or if we're entering a geo, we're just starting to sell into India this quarter. And what we did was we put a team together going back to kind of, market attractiveness, ability to win. India makes a lot of sense for us. Now the B2B SaaS ecosystem is really growing, but there was some product enhancements that we need to do. There were gateways that we didn't work with. There was some very specific tax requirements that needed to get built into the product. And so we put that plan together, and then product came back to us and said, okay, we can deliver this by X date. Well, that'll start driving that GTM entry into the new geo or vertical for that matter, right?
Definitely. And how do you then prioritize? Like, because if product and sales need to work together, right? They're getting the customer feedback, but then how do you sort of prioritize where to target?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to what's the revenue impact for the business, like what, and you've got to think of that in both the short and longer term play, right? There could be something short term that is going to be very lucrative, but long term not. So for us, we always take we start doing what the ROI is going to be. Like what's the revenue impact going to be? The other strategy that product also plays, and sales to some extent, is like how does it impact the enterprise value as well, right? Like if we get into certain product sets or markets or spaces, does that increase our enterprise value exponentially as well as our revenue? Or so I think that ROI.
For our audience, perhaps you can explain what enterprise value means.
Yeah. So the value of the company. So you're talking about Chargebee being worth, $1.5 billion. That's, a multiple of typically the revenue, but there's also a lot of, a lot of thought being put in. What space are you in? How big is that space? You may not have a lot of that space right now, but if the runway is huge and, there's a lot of activity there that people value, then that'll increase the enterprise value of the business. Yeah.
Definitely. Now, say you're moving in reverse here, right? You're an enterprise sales-led company. How do you then, you hit like maybe 30, 40, 50 million in revenue, and you're like stalled, the growth is stalling. There's only so many SDRs and AEs and content and all that you can put out, right?
Yeah.
How do you then start moving to a product-led approach? What are some best practices you've seen?
Yeah, we're working with a couple of customers that are doing exactly this now. They were pure enterprise led, and I've talked to it was Vidyard as well that went the other way. They but yeah, part of it is again working with product. There's a lot of changes that have to happen on the product side. Then you need a platform in order to be able to manage that self-serve. And so one of the clients that we're working with today who's in the cybersecurity space, full sales, enterprise driven, and now they're saying, hey, we want to actually get into more product-led growth. So they're actually putting Chargebee in place because we can fulfill that whole self-serve sign up into subscription plan. So that tool didn't exist before, right? They were using, your typical CRM sales driven motion, but now they needed to figure out, how do I get somebody to sign up for these plans? How do I, present those plans on a checkout page? What tool sets do I have? Once they start self-serving, how do you manage those plans? The dunning against it, the payment against it, the add-ons. Can someone self-serve? Can I change my own plan, extend my terms? And so having the right tool set is one piece of the puzzle, but then you also have to work with product, because product's going to have to do, going back to our onboarding perspective, if somebody can't self-serve and onboard, and light up on their own. So, products may have to do some work to enable that self-serve motion in the product, right?
Interesting you brought up Vidyard, because I had their CEO, Michael Litt, last year this time talk about a topic on reverse freemium, because they were a sales-led organization.
That's exactly right.
And what he said was he carved out one of the most valuable features and made it a product on its own, put a team around it, and shipped that. And that became the fastest growing driver for growth.
And that's a great example. I've spoken a lot with those folks, and that's a great example of somebody that did that motion, right? Did kind of started on the enterprise sales side and then flipped over and added the self-serve product-led piece. Yeah.
Definitely. Awesome. So we're coming close to the top of the hour here. I want to get into international teams, right? So that there's another aspect of growth here. So we talked about growth is building and scaling your team. We talked about, okay, first you get to product market fit, you figure out a repeatable, scalable channel, then you start adding different channels. Product-led is a great one. After you've nailed one channel, nailed and build your sales team. We talked about building your sales team. Now, how about like building international teams? When and why should startups look at going international? What is the framework to navigate global expansion?
Yeah, it's it's pretty common. So we were fortunate, I think, as I mentioned, to kind of be global by nature, because we start out in India and start selling into the US, and all of a sudden, and that inbound, depending on your motion as well, because we get a lot of inbound deals that we can qualify and actually take on in geos that we're not specifically targeting, like Hong Kong, or Israel is not an area that we were currently focusing on, but we had a lot of leads coming in. So part of it is, for us, we were fortunate enough to see a bunch of signals coming in through the marketing channels, i.e. either customers signing up in our freemium product or coming inbound, and us being able to enable them and light them up based on whatever their criteria was. So, we look at, and so we're in 3 regions. As we started this process last year about, where do we go next? And we started with our own data. Like, what's our marketing signals telling us? Where are all these keyword searches, coming from? Who's looking for what? If we got, inbound leads coming in from different places. So that was one. And you can actually, our marketing team set up different silent campaigns just to listen to signals from different places to figure out where they were coming from. And then we actually got into a pretty in-depth geo analysis. We actually worked with Bain on this process, and they provided us with a really good template that, we got into that, what we were talking about before, the market attractiveness and ability to win. And there's like 10 categories under that. And so we went through and started mapping out the geos against how attractive is it? What's the TAM, SAM? What's our ability to win? Competitive landscape, product requirements, and all those things. And then we started stack ranking the geos based on that. And then so that's one. And then again, that we had a cross-functional team doing it. So product needed to understand what they needed to develop. We needed to figure out the sales motion that would work best. A couple of years ago when I first started, we were just starting to do an outbound motion and wanted to start putting a team in place. We had some boots on the ground in the US, but wanted to put boots on the ground in Europe. And our mistake was we just hired a couple salespeople and thought that, it would figure itself out, and it was a disaster. And so the lesson out of that for us is, as we're going in and putting boots on the ground in the next geo, is you need a sales leader to start. That'll be the kind of foundational piece, and then building salespeople around it, versus a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to put Tom in London and then start adding salespeople there and try and manage them in that way. That didn't work for us. It may work for others.
Tom in London, it doesn't typically work because Tom's not English, or maybe he is, but maybe because there's a lot of cultural nuances, right? Over there. And that's why oftentimes people toy with the idea of, hey, maybe I should just buy, I should buy revenue.
Yeah,
maybe there's a smaller outfit there. How have you had the opportunity to buy a company or navigate the options of, okay, maybe I buy versus build?
Yeah, we have actually. And yeah, you bring up an interesting point. So we spent a lot of time thinking about our M&A philosophy. What were we trying to do? Were we trying to buy revenue? Were we trying to, augment the product? And so we actually have taken a tact today, and this may very well change. Our M&A strategy and philosophy is to augment our product set. And so going to find, add-on products or products that solve, specific pain points in the revenue stream for us and for our customers that we don't have today, that somebody spent, 2 or 3 years stewing on and really figuring out that problem. And if they've done that and they've successfully got that there, then that's a great acquisition for us. And then we make it, is it better for us to build or buy that? But that's our strategy today. I think as we get into some of the other geographies that get a lot more complicated, Japan, for example, is a great one. Maybe there is something that says, hey, you know what, it's, we go through channel, or there's already a player there that would be worth acquiring. That makes a lot of sense. The problem when you buy revenue is then now you end up with, now you've got multiple products that do the same thing. Do you ever it becomes very complicated, but there's certainly a play for it.
Definitely. Last year, what I want to take is, we talked about scaling channels. We talked about becoming product led. We talked about internationalization, everything around scaling revenue. When do you become a multi-product company? When do you start adding different product lines?
Yeah, that's actually one of the other strategies that, when you talk about hypergrowth. So we're getting into that. We're into that space now. So now we're into multi-product. We bought a revenue recognition solution because it's a core pain point for our customers that's very adjacent to our core platform. We just bought a collections company because that's on the other end, the front end. The back end of our clients' pain points as well. So we're actually now, in addition to the core, we've got 3 products, and we're going to continue to add products into that. I think for us, when we think about it, is it the same persona? It's the CFO's office for us. Is that pain point relevant to them? So now I can take the same team and I can go to the CFO and say, hey, have you got, how are you managing your subscription management? Do you have a revenue recognition problem? How are your collections? And so, I'm selling to the same office, same persona that's just got multiple different pain points now that I can solve with multiple products.
Same buyer, touches the same sort of stream and
Right.
and fits within each other.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So what's the one piece of conventional advice that you have that most people don't follow or agree with?
This is a good question. I was thinking about this a lot. One of the things, and it was one of my team that mentioned this, and I think it's we talked about this in another discussion I was in, but it's the ROI of empathy. I think that's lost on a lot of people. Doing what's right for customers and employees. I'll give you an example. For like we talked about at the onset of the pandemic, we purposely, when we proactively went and look at all the customers that were going to get hurt, adversely, whether they were in, live events, food and beverage and all those. And we actually proactively went out and just said, we're going to pause everything for you. You don't have to pay us. We know this is going to be a real bite on your business. And I think we did right for a lot of our smaller customers and now have far stronger partnerships. Our MPFs actually increased during that period in those segments where we were doing this, and it just created deeper customer relationships. So I think there's a little bit of you got to look at the long play on that one, but I think the ROI of empathy is not something that's top of mind for everybody.
Great companies are built by people, your customers, your investors, the press, your colleagues, the community. And empathy is the first step to building long-lasting relationships and trust, right? Without empathy, you can't do anything. That's what I feel anyway. Any books you recommend? What's on your top shelf right now? Not the alcohol, the book.
That'd be the Woodford Reserve and the Dalwhinnie Scotch. But book wise, I'm actually, the one I'm reading right now is Bob Iger, Ride of a Lifetime. But relevant to kind of the conversations that we were having around this kind of hyperscaling. Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross is like one, a biblical book that everybody should read, because I think it gets into that, that predictability that allows you then to scale. I liked Behind the Cloud, Mark Benioff's book. Good to Great, a little old school, but Jim Collins, I think that really kind of starts shining some real interesting lights on the key attributes of what make good companies versus great companies. And then the last one I probably throw in there is the Hard Things About the Hard Things, the Ben Horowitz one.
All great books. Predictable Revenue, must read. Behind the Cloud is probably one of the first books I read when I got into product. It's a great book about multiple things, and the Hard Things About Hard Things is fantastic as well. Thank you so much, Adam. It was a great, fun conversation. Felt like we were just sitting right next to each other. Wishing you great success, happy holidays, and wishing you a fantastic 2022 with another 2 billion on your enterprise value.
Let's hope so. Lloyd, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed the discussion, and hope it was valuable for everybody. And happy holidays, everyone. Thanks.